And we're rolling. Cool. All righty. So on round 5 of project 3, the tonal painting. Want to give you guys an update on what's going on with this and where we're heading this evening. So what we're going to be doing here tonight is painting the crowd down here. These ghostly characters need a little bit of color on them. And to explain how we're going to approach that, let's use this arm as an example. So with the arm over here on the right-hand side, you can see all of these orange layers are, I'm going to turn all those off. That's the amount of layers that I use to be able to build up this arm. And we're going to take the same approach to adjusting and working our way through these characters with a slight variation for them. I want to get the first tone on their clothing first, and then I'll go back and do the shadow pass over the rest of this stuff. And what we're going to see here with the arm is I've got my base color. Now, my flat color has got a couple little highlights on it and maybe some darker tones down here at the bottom. You can see these little lines that are rolling through there. They're very faint, but I've darkened it up. I do this at the very end, just if I need to push anything just a little bit more with the burn and the dodge tool. This is going to work with color as well. The same approach can be used for any color renderings and will help you make your way through just about any painting solution that you need. I'm working heavily from my reference images over here on the right-hand side. You can see that I've got my hand. However, there's some big differences that are going on with this hand reference image and my hand, my arm on the right-hand side. The hand on the left, the reference image, is within the foreground. The other one is sort of it's much larger. It's in the middle ground. Because it's larger, that means that more light rays are going to be able to wrap around it. Also, the contrast on this photo on the left-hand side is really high, and it's moving into pure pure black, which I don't want to go into pure black within my middle tones because of atmospheric perspective, so we're going to be making some adjustments. That said, I've got a good little dark middle tone over here that I've been using that I'm going to work and push and pull. Bless me. Next up, once I've got my well, let's show you how I approach this. So at first, I've got my sketch. You can see my sketch in blue lines here. And I'm going to take my hard round brush with the pressure sensitivity on it and just outline the entire arm. Then I'm going to fill that color with one flat shade and tone. From there, I've got some line indications within my sketch for where the bicep's at, some other slight information that I've included. I might leave it on while I'm doing my shadow pass, but I'll turn it off fairly quickly after that. Let's look at that shadow pass. The shadow pass, I'm using a rough brush here, and whenever I'm painting within the shadow passes, or really any of the passes within these paintings, I'm always going to turn my brush down, turn your smoothing on to like 25%, and I'm going to start by turning my brush down to like 50%, 40%, somewhere around there. The reason for this is that it allows me to be able to build up those tones gradually instead of moving right into 100% of a pure tone. Note, I am not using the fuzzy brush. I really do not like using the fuzzy brush until the very end. And that's for fine polish and detailing and adjusting the entire light. So often I see starting digital illustrators come in and all their shadows are handled with the fuzzy brush, and you're really missing a lot of what painting is. Oops. Which is developing these different brush strokes and these layers and doing it in a methodical way. In this case, the arm is made out of stone, so it's a rougher brush, and I'm letting that roughness kind of hang out in there. But all those little nicks and crannies, it's also really rough because it's made out of stone. But this can work on skin as well. It's kind of like using charcoal. It works really, really nicely. Once I've got my shadow pass complete, and I'm using the shadows to really kind of paint the forms and think about where the lighting is wrapping around on this hand and this arm, I've learned a lot about this arm that I'm painting. I've defined the shapes and the forms a lot more than I had just a moment ago with the flat color. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to start adding my highlight pass. I'm thinking about the sun, how the sun is hitting this arm. I'm thinking about the forms, right? So we've got the bicep, which is more of a round sort of tennis ball, softball type of shape, and the way that the light is going to dither and kind of gradient out across the arm there. Same thing, we've got a little bit of a rounder shape going on within the character's forearm. And so the light is pushing around that arm a little bit more. I'm also going through on my hands and just very quickly establishing where the highlights, where the most light is going to hit each one of the fingers. And I'm thinking about the form and where the planes are and how the highlights, if you put a bright flashlight on that hand, is going to bend and push around it. From there, got another layer. That's just a ground layer. I don't know why that one's thrown in there, but yeah, did some stuff on the ground. Then I go back with my uh, rim lighting, my brighter highlight, and start establishing that. Because this is made of stone and I want to have a rough surface that I'm describing, this is not a clean line. Those little divots and extra bits of expression on the left-hand side of the line here is completely intentional. And then the same thing with those highlights. Let me turn it on and off here. You can see how much I'm going inside of my highlight that I already had established and adding some more of those little divots and punctuation marks and increasing the roundness of it, of how the light is hitting and spilling around. Now, one of the other cool things with this highlight pass is that it allows you to be able to make some corrections, right? So I've already done my first highlight pass. That second brighter highlight pass, you can see on the edge of the thumb here that it's got a little bit of gray there. And that's going to, it looks a little bit messy when it's up against the sky. It's not realistic. So by doing that extra highlight pass, it allows me to be able to refine the shapes even more. You're not losing anything. It's okay. You can't save every little detail when you're doing this stuff. Now that I'm looking at it a second and third time, I'm seeing like more stuff. I would go in and adjust on this. So just a little bit of black right up the base of these fingers. There we go. Yeah, it's a little better. Cool. And then on top of that, this is the time that I finally go in and use the fuzzy brush. So this entire time I've held down control and have my flat color region selected. I'm creating new layers on top of that. Now I'm going to use the fuzzy brush, and the fuzzy brush is just a small little adjustment here, and I want to explain why I did this. So because this is a massive object, and I was talking about how the light rays are kind of really bouncing all around this thing because it's so huge, there's some diffusion that happens where it becomes a little bit brighter up at the top compared to the bottom, especially as it starts to get closer to the light source. So I'm sort of accentuating. This is the cool part about working with an illustration, is we get to accentuate some of those natural things that light does to help draw attention to our paintings. And that is the only time that I'm really using the fuzzy brush, is just to be able to make it so that my darks up at the top aren't quite as dark as they are down at the bottom, especially as it starts to get up there closer to the bright white of the sky. And as we zoom back, that's a pretty good looking arm right there for this stage of the painting. When I went through and did the dagger, I did the exact same thing with the dagger, same steps. Lock in the flat color. From there, do a shadow pass, then a highlight pass, and then use the brighter highlight pass to refine the shape more and more. So you can see, got my shadows over here on the left-hand side, middle tone, highlights all up through here, and then using just a little bit of that super bright white to be able to flake. There's, looks like it's got a fuzzy brush on it also, but there's the super bright highlight pass, standard highlight pass, which you can see pretty well down here on the bottom of the blade. There it is, turn it on, turn it off. And with each one of these passes, I'm refining that shape more and more. And there's the shadow pass. Without the shadow pass, you can see how much detail is lost, but that also helps to explain how much detail you are discovering and learning about your painting just by getting that shadow pass completed. All right. Now, on to these people. Save out real quick. Do. So for the folks, here's how they worked. The exact same way as the arm and the dagger. Had my initial sketch, then I went back and did another sketch to be able to figure out the clothing on these characters. By having a good, well-developed initial sketch, you are going to be so much closer. You're doing so much of the work here at the beginning. Um, so you're taking the guesswork out of it later on, even though these faces are still pretty rough, right? They're not perfectly defined drawings. I'm still considering these kind of background characters, but I've got the clothing pretty well figured out. With my clothing sketch on these characters, I'm starting to think about where the wrinkles are at, and that's going to help me an awful lot as I start to build in the shadows. So, first step to making good characters, have a good sketch where you're thinking through the clothing, how the clothing is folding and laying on the characters' bodies, and also considering, we know the light source is coming from the top right-hand side, and how that's going to affect that really impacted the way that I was drawing the characters as well. And yeah, we're at a pretty good spot. First step for these characters, I'm going to start with the guys in the super foreground, this group right here. So let's do a color overlay, and now we'll be able to see them. These three in red are who I'm going to begin with. So turn off that color overlay. It's like I've got another layer on top of them. What I'm going to do is hold down the control button and create a new layer. And my first layer, what I want to go through and do with this is we've got this super dark color that we've been using on the cabin within the foreground. Now, this is going to change a lot. I'm going to be adding lighter colors on top of it, and it's going to look much different at the end. I know for now that the darkness of that cabin can heavily influence my color choices throughout the rest of the drawing in the illustration. So I don't quite want to pick the super dark color because that's probably going to happen with some of the shading on these guys within the foreground. So instead, I want to find a fairly dark color, which looks like this. So it's not quite that super dark, but it's still a pretty dark tone. And now I can go through and start coloring in the clothing on the characters. As I do this and do the clothing pass on the characters, that's going to help a lot. They're going to start to pop immediately once we get some hair on their head and, color in the character's vest and do some other little things. When after that, if I wasn't doing a demo, I would do the clothing pass, colors for the clothes on all these little characters, all the way back to where the truck is at in the far left-hand side, right? I would go through and complete that entire step. And then I would go back and I would start doing the shadow pass, and I would do the shadow pass on each and every one of the characters on the way through. What I think, so that you're not just sitting me watching me do a character's hair this entire time, that's going to be useful for you guys, is maybe we'll do this fellow in the foreground. We'll do Buddy, who's holding up the actual plaque. That's a pretty important part of the painting. And then we'll do a third one sort of way back here. I really like the pose on this guy who's got his arms crossed back here. I think he looks pretty cool. And I think what that'll allow me to be able to do is a character within the foreground, a little bit further back, and then the far background. And we'll get to see how the colors change and become lighter and less dark with each one of these steps back that we take. So I've got a good black color that's loaded in here right now. I've got a new layer created. And again, we're just painting in the colors on these characters. So my smoothing's turned up to 25%, just like I did with the characters with the stone arm. I've got my brush set to 42%. I'm not at 100%. I'm not using the fuzzy brush, and um, I'm using a textured brush while I do this. So let's go in and we'll give him a colored turban. Sometimes in studying my reference images, I saw that they can have patterns and things on them, but just to be able to separate it out from the white clothing of the guy behind him, I'm gonna start shading this in. So again, this is just another color blocking pass here. 40%, you can see that I'm getting some happy little mistakes and lines that are being created around the way. I could start accentuating some of the shadows within here. Let's thinking. I need some of this stuff to be a little bit sharp. So I'm going to go into my hard brush, turn off the weightedness of it. I need to fill in his hair. I don't think this guy has a mustache. All right, so we got the hair, some of the turban. We still got a shadow pass that we're going to be creating on that. The trick for me when I'm doing this is to not detail out every little thing. Um, Whenever you look at any of the Renaissance painters, they were the masters of doing the crowd shot, right? And one of the cool things that you notice is that not everything is in a perfectly like rendered fashion. They're letting some of the details that are not as important fade away. And we're trying to do the same thing with this headpiece to where the details are there, but we don't need to render everything 120% focus. That'll be enough on that for right now. We've got the top of the shovel here that's going to be metal, so it's going to be a little bit darker, and that's creating some strong contrast with the character's shoulder. I like that. And I'm just making some decisions along the way. I am working at 40%, but I'm not lifting my brush up. That's why I'm not getting those double little lines here. There we go. Mhm. Just establishing some of the color there. And yeah, we've got a big shadow pass on that character that we're going to do here in a moment. And that's working pretty well for me to be able to give it a little bit of tone and a little bit of color. Next up, we've got our middle layer fella. So same deal. I'm going to hold down Control, get them isolated, and create one new layer over the top of this fella. All right, so with this guy, you can instantly see that he's got a belt on. Get that belt, some shading. He's got a beard, so we want to go in and shade that in. Mouth is inside the mouth. That's a shadow, so we're not going to really worry about that too much right now. Lanyard, holding that together. Anything else that I want to shade on this guy at this time? Oh, yeah. Sandals. And he's got some footwear. And now for the plaque. So you can see that this really isn't that too long of a process. Most of their clothing is going to be a lighter color. Looks like he's got some sleeves on, so let's give him a little bit of detail right around the sleeves. Cool. It's working for me. Add a little bit of noise. So this is a good time to do any type of patterning in your characters as well. Their clothing has got any type of like thread work, needlework, anything like that. That'll help to separate this out visually on him a little bit as well. Again, I'm not being too accurate at this, just running through it really fast. Got my shadow pass that I'm going to do. Cool. So that's starting to just block out that character a little bit more. And all of a sudden, he's starting to look more accurate. Now we've got our guy with the folded arms way here in the back. I like him so much. I don't want to mess him up. Looks like he's going to have a belt on also. He's got his belt. There's a fold. Some sandals. One more color there. He's got a beard also. Do. And yeah, let's leave it alone. So just that extra little stripe of color in there. All right, so 1, 2, 3. We've got our colors working back through the characters. I don't think that it's too dark. It's not going to make too big of a difference here on them. Now we're going to do the shadow pass on these guys. So I've got this super dark color within the foreground. I could use it, but their clothing is mostly white. So let's go in with this middle tone here and see what we could discover. Now, when I'm working with my shadow pass, I start over from the beginning. I'm not going to go from the back forward. I want to start with this first fellow. I'm going to hold down Control, and then I'm going to work on top of the color pass that I just did just a moment ago. Now, with the shadow pass, yeah, these guys aren't made of stone, so go ahead and make some choices here. I just want to work fairly quickly through this. His back is to the sun. It's going to start to catch some of the light. Here's his sleeve, which again is not in the light. And just making some big choices. So the front of his sleeve is hitting the light. So we're going to have a little bit of a wraparound with those colors. And it's going to get darker on the backside. Underneath his headpiece. Wish I knew the exact name for it. Ignorant. All right. So with that brush at 40%, now I can go back and just start making some other choices here about the shading. Righty. Got a little bit on his hand, a little bit right there. Okay, so that's feeling pretty good for me. I'm gonna use my smudge tool just a little bit to be able to soften up some of these shapes and forms. Haven't really done anything on the top of his head yet. do that in just a moment. With the smudge tool, if you overuse the smudge tool, people are going to be able to tell that you are overusing the smudge tool. So don't overuse the smudge tool. Use it sparingly. Leave some of your hard lines within your painting. You don't have to smudge everything. Um, it's okay to have some of those brush strokes that are still existing in there. Don't need everything to look like melted crayons. So one of the other things with the smudge tool, if you want to get real technical with it, you can think just like we did with that light pass, that some things are going to become more shaded. So let's go in. Again, this is my first shadow pass on this character. So we've got this whole backside of his turban, get a little bit darker, laying in some colors here. Got the shadow on the back of his head where the light's not hitting. There you go. That's feeling pretty good. Let's drop the burn tool on this real quick. I'm just doing this in the areas where the light is hitting the least. So at 40%, this allows me 2 marks, 2 strokes to be able to get to the full opacity. Some other nice lines and creases that I'd created that I think I'm going to lose as I move forward. But that's looking pretty sharp. We've got some good color textures that are existing within there. And now I think we're in a pretty good spot to go into our second character. Again, I would do this with all 3 of these characters, with all the clothing within the foreground. Then I would do the shadow pass on all 3 of the characters within the foreground, and then go to the middle ground characters. But for the sake of this demo, we're just going to do 1 on each one of these planes. All right, so this fella. Now, this is where those shadows start to become a little bit different. We had our deepest shadow color in here. I'm going to use, for my first shadow pass, sort of the middle shadow color on this guy. Got a new layer turned on. We're still working at 48%. And I want there to be a little bit of see-throughness on his clothing, light sheer sort of pattern. So as it gets further away from him, that's going to open up. I'm going to use smudge tool just a little bit here. There we go. Now we got that second pass for the lines. Look like my pressured brush is turned on. That pin pressure is on. We're good. Okay. So we know that the light is coming from the top left-hand side. So underneath his belt, there's going to be a little bit of a shadow down there. Can't really reach around his upper thigh, so that's going to become a darker area. That's all looking pretty good. A little bit of shadow where the ankle becomes exposed around the edge of the foot. Looking pretty nice. Now we've got the face shadows to start doing on this guy. So easiest spot to start on a character's face is the eye sockets, recessing those back and just committing to, not making the eyes perfectly white, instead letting them drop back a little bit inside the the character's skull. We know we got the shadow coming from the left-hand side, so I got a shadow coming off the edge of the nose. That's an easy one to be able to solve for. Now we've got a bunch of shadow that's coming down off of and onto his beard. Again, top right for the sun. Shading this piece in. Then we got under the armpit. No light's going to hit under there on this backside. Up the edge of his arm. Move it around the roundness of his belly and his body. This whole backside isn't going to really catch any light. There we go. Trying to do some little marks for the wrinkles on him so we don't lose those that were in the sketch. Underside of his forearm, that's gonna not really catch too much of the shadow. I know that I've got my burn tool, but I don't want to use the burn tool too much. A little bit underneath the armpit, but again, not too much. There we go. And now we got the left-hand side of his head. I think it's shaded. And that's all working pretty well for us so far. Backside of his hand. A little bit more on the tablet. I think the highlight is really going to help this stuff start to pop just a little bit more. Around those fingers. Looking pretty good. All right. So one of the things that I tend to do is because I started off with like Prismacolor and oil pastels and stuff in high school, didn't have a lot of painting classes. I have a tendency to draw with the paintbrush instead of actually paint with the paintbrush. And I wish this didn't happen to me. It's something that I'm always trying to sort of fight against. Now we've got our character in the background. So the same thing, same logic. We've got our middle shadow that we were working from before. I'm going to use my middle shadow on this guy. And let's go back to this character in the very back, our cool dude that we like so much. So on top of his clothing, a lot of him is going to be in shadow because his back is totally to the sun. Those shoulders are really going to catch a lot of the light. A little bit of a deep shadow right where his armpit's at on the other side, underneath the arms, and wherever those arms connect. Simple stuff, right? Pretty logical, nothing too funky here. And it's all about working with that 40% brush, okay? So giving him just a couple more little wrinkles here and there. Looking good. And that is all we need for the shadow pass for right now. We just learned a lot about these characters through that shadow pass. Might still look a little bit messy, but you can see how much more defined these characters are very, very quickly compared to their previous iteration just by adding the shadow pass to them as well as giving a little bit of color to the hair or to their clothing. Now we have arrived at our highlight pass. Now I haven't really determined too much of what's going on with the highlights within the extreme foreground yet, but we're going to push through boldly. And I'm going to use my super bright highlight from my middle ground, which let's just do a quick spot check here. And it's not pure white yet, so I think that's bright, but not too bright for us to be able to go through. It still leaves us quite a bit of wiggle room. And I'm going to move on to that highlight pass. So in the same process that you saw me do the stone arm, I'm going through and doing these characters as well. So now I've got all three of those foreground characters selected. I'm going to go over where my shadow pass was at on a new layer on top of it. And now we really get to start defining some stuff for these characters. Still at 40% with my brush, using the hard brush, not the fuzzy brush, the hard brush. And I'm using 40% just because I want to force my hand to commit to these bright areas at first. There's probably some stuff that, you know, let's get a highlight going on the edge of the shovel. Top of the hand. Skin's going to be a little bit lighter. There we go. Highlight on his sleeve. And now we've got the shadow wrapping around. That shadow wrapping around lets me know that's probably a good spot to be able to use the smudge tool and introduce a little bit of a smoother gradient. Pushing some of that white up right onto the skin. Looking good. Let's get rid of some of these tones, just a little bit softer. I still want to leave some of them rough. All right. And we've got that rim lighting. We started off really soft over here. Bring it in a little bit more as we get rounder. And then bounce lighting coming off the ground. Soften up some of those edges. This is again why we have the whole layer isolated as well, to be able to push against that edge. We have to be using the smudge tool on these. Just burn those just a little bit so that they're softer. Cool. That's working pretty good for me. Let's go in. Now we've got the character's face. This is where a lot of the light is going to be hitting. A little bit of a highlight on the character's hair. Rim light going down the edge of the turban. Headpiece. Quickly going through and highlighting some of those parts. Help me define some of those shapes from before a little bit better. All right, there we go. A bit of a rim light on him. It's looking good. A little bit of an edge just to pull that back. A little bit right here as well. Cool. So same deal where the whole back left-hand side, we're letting those details drift away. They don't really need to be there. Leaving some of my brush work and just polishing it up just a little bit with the smudge tool, but not too much, not overusing the smudge tool. I think you've heard me say that once or twice tonight. Cool. So that's working pretty well. Let's unclick him and check him out. Bam. So just that quickly, we went from, what layer are we on? 3 layers up. We got 1, 2, and 3. So we went from a flat rendering on this character, 1 shade, clothing pass, shadow pass, highlight pass. And now when we turn off my stroke, that character is, my gosh, magically looking pretty well defined here. Now, there's more refinement that I can go through and do. I can make some of the shadows darker. I can detail them out at this stage, but transitioning from my well-developed sketch into a rendering of this character just went really, really fast, right? So now even if we start to zoom back here on our full canvas, let me save, this is a good time to save, we can see that character, he's got clothing, he's got the wrinkles within his clothing, we can see the shovel a little bit. There's still things to darken up or brighten up a little bit more, but we are 90% of the way there, as promised, with these couple passes. All right, so now we got our middle fellas. Let's see what that highlight pass does on top of our shadow pass. Again, we've got pretty bright clothing on. So let's make some big calls, some big decisions here for where the light's hitting on him. This is why I haven't touched the opacity. I'm still working at 40% on this character. Feels good to me. Let's go in with his arm. We know the arm is catching a lot of light. Doing my first big block on it. Do, 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 do. Cool. Feeling good. Could use that sketch now to help me remember where the heck my fingers are at. But we're going to get there. All right. So some good light going on. Like I said, the tablet should start to look a lot better. We want this to be an important part of the final shot. So I probably need to brine this up. This might be one of the only like pure white things within the entire scene, but we're starting to establish some of those shapes here. Again, rim lighting just around the edges. That's starting to look much, much brighter. Cool. So now with the character's face, bridge of the nose is always a good spot to start. Just under the eye, moving out, works pretty well. Top of the brow, catches a good bit of the lighting and a little bit of a highlight right on the nose. And that other little highlight there. And that's going to work pretty good for highlighting this character out. Let's give just some light highlights. We're here on the edge. We're losing a lot of those details, but that's okay. And for the beard, we need to darken that up quite a bit more. But for now, it's working pretty nicely. Let's go in. Got the top of the leg. We know that under that clothing, we've got the thigh. So that's going to catch a good spot. It's a nice round shape. The thigh is. So I know I can start there and start just pulling those lines over. I'm always thinking about the form that I'm rendering underneath the clothing. Be bright and catch a little bit more shadow as we approach the groin area. A little bit of bounce light kind of coming up off the sand. It doesn't need to be quite as bright down there. It's probably something that I can delete out. We said we wanted a little bit of light coming through. We're just going to do this. This is prime smudge tool territory right there. Just setting some intentions. Okay, there we go. Highlight the foot just a little bit. Let's check them. So we just did a quick top to bottom. Now I'm going to do my smudge tool. Notice I'm not getting slowed down too much within any of these areas. I'm trying to do a quick pass with the highlight, keeping it messy at first, using my brackets to increase the brush size on my keyboard, and let's highlight all that out. Really smudging this down at the bottom so it's not quite as bright as what we're seeing on the character's knee. The streaks going across the character's body. Let's pull those down just a little bit more, soften them. The tight wrinkles need to stay with tight lines. And just that quick, you've got this guy with some good, pretty decent shading going on with him. There's still refinement that can go on. Trying to keep this quick for you guys for just a general pass, but in just 3 layers, right? We went from flat color, clothing, shadow pass to the highlights. You can see how much those highlights really help with each pass to be able to define the shape of the character even more. Our little fella down here at the very back, I'm still using that same super bright white that I was previously. He likely does not need as bright of a color on him. So we're going to, because he's further away and we've got atmospheric perspective that's occurring. Yeah, let's do it. Let's use it. All right, there's my super bright. Holding down control, working on top of my shadow pass. I can always turn this down, the opacity of it later on, still at 40%. Thinking about where the lighting is hitting on this character, right up on top of the arms. Be a little bit at the side of his face. And this will give me a chance to really make those robes look good. Cool. I don't think he gets any real backlighting on him. Or sorry, around the bottom of his pants. Not really needed too much. But yeah, the shadows aren't going to be as deep on him because he is further away, but he's still catching a good bit of those highlights. And now as we start to zoom back, we get the idea of his clothing. We get the idea that he's shaded where the lighting is hitting on him. It all feels pretty realistic. And between these 3 characters, just that quick, we've established that this fella with the shovel has got a darker shadow pass on him than the middle ground character does. The shadows aren't quite as deep or as pushed back. They probably could be a little bit darker. And then this character doesn't have as much contrast with him. All right, so there's 3 characters moving at different areas within the painting very, very quickly. I hope that this gives you guys some kind of indication. I'm not getting stuck just working on the character's face. I'm moving through each one of these very, very rapidly, especially within a crowd scene, making some quick decisions. And with this process of blocking your character, going to the shadow pass, then doing the highlights, you're going to start to see them come into focus with each one of these passes more and more. It's really that simple. I hope that this helps you guys think through this, especially when it comes if you have trouble doing characters with clothing and trying to figure out how to do the shadows and get lighting within a scene. All that lighting that we just did is all coming from the top right-hand side. And yeah, it should look pretty cool once we get the rest of these characters rendered. Probably still going to be some balancing issues that are going to happen between these characters and the 2 that are on the interior of the building or up on the structure compared to the characters down below, and making sure that we've got deep values running all the way through and it's working appropriately. But for now, that is how I would begin doing a crowd sequence. So thanks so much for checking this out. Hope it is useful for you. And that's going to do it for this session.